Hi, welcome back. Today I'm going to be addressing 4 pieces of relationship advice that you have sent me beforehand on Instagram and that you weren't sure you should follow. I'm going to break it down into 3 parts. First, I'll share why there is some truth in the piece of advice that you've received. 2, I'm going to go into why I believe it's unhealthy if you want a healthier relationship. And 3, I'll share an alternative to better support you in building a healthy, happy, and lasting relationship. As always, you'll have timestamps in the description below so that if you want to skip to a specific piece of advice, you can do that. And before we get into it, there's already a part 1 of this series. The reason I'm making this into a series is 1, because of the amount of DMs that I get on a daily basis on Instagram, sharing the pieces of advice that you have received and you didn't know if you should follow, if that was actually something that you should consider. And second, because in my personal experience, going through the motions of my 15-year relationship, I have received a ton of advice, whether it was about my dating journey, long distance, marriage before we got married. And so I feel like at every step of our journey, we have received pieces of advice, even from people who had the best of intentions, and some we chose not to listen to, and I'm just so glad we didn't. And so this series is designed to help you feel more confident when you hear relationship advice, so that you can start deciding which ones you should be listening to, which ones maybe not, and have a different perspective on these different pieces of advice so that if you do hear them, you have an alternative way to respond and to start thinking about them. All right, let's get into it. The first piece of advice is, what if they keep making the same mistake over and over again? So someone DM'd me saying that they had received this type of text from someone and they weren't sure if they should actually listen to that or give their partner another chance. Now, if someone repeats the same mistake over and over again, you will lose trust. We need accountability from both partners in order to make a relationship work. We as humans need a certain level of safety in order to thrive in a relationship. That is one of our basic human needs. We need to feel like we have some sense of safety. If not, we're going to be operating from our survival mode. And so if we feel like someone will keep making the same mistakes over again and we can't build trust, there is a lack of safety. There is some uncertainty that actually creates stress and won't help us feel at peace, satisfied, grounded, confident about the relationship. So I get why someone would say, what if they keep making the same mistake over and over again as a way to protect you, as a way to make sure that you don't get hurt again? Now, the reason that question can be unhealthy if you want to build a healthy relationship with someone is because, first of all, what if questions are focused on the future. We cannot control the future, and so asking ourselves, what if, actually keeps us stuck. It does not empower us because we don't know what will happen tomorrow, what will happen in the next few seconds. We cannot predict that. And so what if questions just do not empower us? They typically lead to more anxiety and confusion because we're trying to anticipate scenarios that are in the future. And again, the future isn't something that we can control. I'd encourage you to ask yourself different questions. For example, is my partner aware of their mistakes and their impact on me? Awareness is needed if we're expecting a certain change of behavior in someone. And if they are not, have I communicated the impact that their mistake has had on me and the fact that it might be bothering me and making me anxious about our future together, for example? And so awareness is first things first. Second question you can start to ask yourself, is my partner actively working on not repeating the mistakes that we're talking about? And is there anything that I can do on my side to support them in doing that? Maybe they have picked up a certain habit and they keep repeating the same mistake out of habit. Is there anything that I can do to support them in developing a new, healthier habit and avoid the mistake that they're trying to avoid, if they're, of course, willing and aware of the mistake that's impacting me and the relationship? And the third question is where I'd go, well, what if they actually do make the same mistake? And more than that, what am I willing to tolerate if mistakes repeat? Do we, for example, have agreements or boundaries or non-negotiables in place so that we can work towards not repeating that mistake and doing our best to develop healthier habits? So what if they actually do repeat that mistake? What is in place today to avoid that? Have we communicated about that? Have I expressed boundaries and things that are so important for me that I'm maybe not willing to accept moving forward? So maybe they have made a mistake that for me has to be a one-time thing because it's just so big that it is something that I'm not willing to accept moving forward, that gets to be a conversation, and not just a conversation about what the mistake was and how that impacted you, but also what you are tolerating or not from here onwards, so that it's just so clear what the consequences as well are of them repeating the mistake. It's so important for someone to also know what the consequences are of their actions, of their behaviors. And if you can express that, you can start to discuss your boundaries, your needs, and what will happen if that mistake keeps repeating. Now, if your partner is aware of the mistakes that they've made and agrees to make efforts and actively shows signs of efforts, building new habits takes time and practice. So know that as much as they are working towards building new habits, sometimes it just takes some time and practice to develop new, healthier ways to deal with situations and not repeat the same mistakes. And so the alternative way of thinking about what if my partner makes mistakes over and over again is, what are we doing to address the mistakes that have been made? What are we doing, or what can we do to prevent the same mistakes from happening? And what do I choose to do if the same mistakes happen again? And so you're empowering yourself with different questions, with questions that you can start answering so that you can decide what needs to happen for you to feel safe, for you to feel like you can trust your partner, and that you're both making efforts towards that. And so again, we want to move away from the what if questions that are very future focused. And again, that's not something we can control, to something that is more present based. What needs to happen for me? What do I choose to tolerate? What do I not choose to tolerate? What are the boundaries that we can set? What are the conversations that we might need to have? Those are questions that are more present based and are more in your control, because you can do something about that. The scenario in the future, you can't do anything about it. You can of course think of different scenarios, but just don't get stuck in future thinking, because again, that is out of your control. And so bring that control back into what you can do about the situation, and have those conversations with your partner so that they are aware of their mistakes. You give them a chance to make efforts, you express what you need and what you would not want to tolerate moving forward, and you see what agreements you can reach, especially if these are mistakes that are really important for you to not repeat. The second piece of advice that you have submitted is, have zero expectations from your spouse. And so you have heard that you should not be having any expectations from your spouse. This is why I agree and see some truth in it. Having too many or unrealistic expectations from our partner can lead to frustrations. It can lead to resentment. It can lead to disappointment, because we form these ideas of how our partner should be. And if we have too many or too many unrealistic ones, we increase our chances of being disappointed because they might not be able to tick all of the boxes. So I get where that statement comes from. If we have zero expectations, we have zero disappointment. That is a safe option. And another reason why I get why someone would say that is that if we have expectations from our partner, it can make them feel like we are trying to change them, or we are trying to impose certain things on them. And the goal of a relationship is not to mold our partner into what we want them to be like. There is a certain acceptance that we need to have as to how our partner is, regardless of our differences. So if we're constantly trying to mold someone into what we expect them to be, there's a chance that we will start losing them because they will not feel up to our standards. And so them not feeling good enough for you will actually push them further away. Now, here's why I disagree with that advice. The reality is that we all come to a relationship with expectations, whether we have expectations from our past experiences, from our upbringing, from what we see around us. There are so many expectations that we've built up over time. That's just the reality of things. We do come to a relationship with expectations, and so asking someone to have zero expectations isn't realistic either, just like having too many expectations is also unrealistic. A healthy relationship requires us to voice our expectations, to voice our needs, so that we can find what works best for the relationship. If I never voice my expectations or my needs, am I really authentic with my partner? Are we really authentic with each other? Are we really discussing what we actually need for the relationship to work? I believe that we can have a healthy level of expectations that I will call standards. And standards are expectations that you would like to see for the relationship to work. This typically is, for example, what matters to you. What matters to you in a partner? What you would love to see from your partner as well, so that you feel like a team, for example, or so that you feel loved, or so that you feel appreciated. There are certain things that we can communicate communicate as standards so that we can go, this is the relationship that I would love to have. Can we work towards that? What is your perspective? And that way we can start setting standards in our relationship rather than having zero expectations, maybe bottling things up, or having too many expectations and that leading to disappointment. And I believe that standards actually help a couple grow. If we can be open about the standards that we want to have in our relationship, we can start building something that works for us. For example, in my relationship, we have expectations around the way that we talk to each other. We have voiced that expectation and we have decided that we will not, for example, insult each other. You will never find us insulting each other, even if we have a big disagreement. And so that for us is an expectation that we have voiced, something that we had both wanted for the relationship, and that's what I would call a standard. If you can voice what is important for you, get your partner's perspective, and decide what works for you in the way that you interact, in the way that you communicate, for example, in how you want to grow together, those are more like standards. And so I'm not an advocate of having zero expectations of someone, but I agree that having too many of them or unrealistic ones will negatively impact the relationship. And so I'd encourage you to differentiate between having too many expectations, trying to get our partner to be a certain way and to check all of our boxes, and setting standards. What are the expectations that you can start voicing so that you can work towards having a healthy, happy relationship and feel like a team? Many of us have this expectation of what a partner should be, how they should look like, how they should react, but we forget that first of all, we're imperfect human beings. There will be things that might not meet our expectations. That's where we get to voice them. That's where we get to communicate certain things with our partner when they're important for us. And second, a lot of us put so much pressure on one person meeting all of our needs, being a certain way, that just leads to a lot of frustration on both sides. So an alternative that I want to leave you with the next time that you hear that type of advice is, it's natural to have expectations, but we want to be open about them. We want to know which ones can we create standards from, which ones are important for me in a relationship so that we can come to an agreement, we can be authentic with each other, and we can start to grow together over time rather than having zero expectations, maybe bottling things up, maybe not even voicing our needs. A relationship is something that you create together. It's something where you build habits that work for you so that you feel loved, you feel seen, you feel understood. And so how can you create that if you never voice your expectations, if you never voice your needs, if you never voice what you would love to see from your partner, for example? Then you can start to create these agreements and decide what works for you. And going back to standards, you are then creating the standards that help you feel like you are in this together and that you're actually feeling like a team. All right, so third piece of advice that you have submitted. If he's distant, it's because he has someone else. That is a very common one that I've heard, and one that I've been told as well at some point. So this is why I agree. In some cases, it's true. If someone is distant, it can be because they have someone else. Now, here's why I disagree with that advice and why I believe that in some situations, it can actually sabotage even the potentially healthiest relationships. So even relationships that have a chance, even relationships where both partners are pretty healthy, where both partners are maybe just going through a rough time, that piece of advice can sabotage many relationships because it is not always the case. If someone becomes distant, it doesn't automatically mean that they are seeing someone else. People do different things when they get distant. They might spend more time at work. They might spend more time with loved ones or with friends. What someone does when they distance themselves can tell you a lot about what they might be needing. For example, delving into work might give them a sense of certainty, of predictability, of significance, because maybe at work they feel like they have a sense of achievement, they have a sense of security, they know how to do the job, they know that their colleagues are there, they know the environment. And so some people meet some of their most important needs at work. Or for example, if someone gets distant and spends more time with family or close friends, that can be their need to connect. If they get distant and spend more time alone, that can be a sign that they need to connect with themselves and they need that space to do that. People get distant for many different reasons, and a common one is issues in the relationship. It's not always the case, but that is a pretty big one. So issues in the relationship, feeling dissatisfied, feeling hurt, feeling unappreciated, feeling unseen, those things can lead someone to get distant and meet the needs that they're trying to meet in the relationship somewhere else. Again, that could be at work or with friends or with family or even alone. So you want to notice, what is someone doing when they get distant, and what need might they be trying to meet? What are they doing and why might they be doing that? So that I can start noticing what they might be lacking in the relationship. Again, someone getting distant isn't always because there are issues in the relationship, but that is a pretty big reason why people get distant. I know that it can be really hard to see someone get distant, and I want to point out that more often than not, someone who gets distant has learned to do that based on past experiences. They distance themselves as a way to protect their energy, to protect their space, and to feel safe. They would do that regardless of the person that they're with. It's their coping mechanism. It's become a habit. It's their go-to strategy to deal with situations. And so now that you have the different reasons why someone would get distant and what they might be doing when they get distant, you then want to also ask yourself, when they get distant, what pushes them away? In my relationship, for example, I see that Dennis would push away if I start to criticize him pretty often, if I make him feel like he can never live up to my expectations. And so that's happened more in the past than it has now, but now I still notice that if I start to fall into those patterns, he will start to get more distant. So sometimes he will get distant just because he needs space, and it has nothing to do with a relationship, but other times if he gets distant, it's because of something in the relationship. And so if someone gets distant, be curious. Understand what's going on for them. Understand what they might be needing. Understand what led them to be distant, before assuming that if they get distant, it's automatically to see someone else. And if they do see someone else, then what are they getting in that relationship or with that person that they are maybe not getting in the relationship? Or again, what is the reason that they might be seeking something in this other person rather than with you or in the relationship? There could be different reasons here, but again, get curious, understand that, have a conversation with them about what's going on, and be as curious as you can instead of jumping to conclusions. That will just push them further away. Curiosity is key. And the fourth piece of advice that you've submitted is, if you're not engaged after 5 years, this means that something is wrong with your relationship. I have been told exactly the same quite a few times, so I personally relate to this one, and quite a lot of you have submitted something similar. So this is why I see some truth in this type of advice. We are used to seeing people get engaged after a certain time in their relationship. So I get that it can spark doubts if you and your partner aren't committed yet in the way that society sees commitment. And again, I was told the same. It took us 10 years to get engaged. And some people would say that Dennis wasn't really committed to me because he waited so long. And that meant that he would eventually leave me and actually never really commit. So I used to think that maybe something was wrong with our relationship and that people were right. So it really made me doubt my relationship. And it was a really weird time because I was getting this advice and I was starting to believe it. So I get that if you're having that advice, it can be very, very confusing. Again, I get why someone would suggest that something is wrong because there is an expectation of how long you should be dating before you get engaged, how long is too much. If you have been together for quite a long time and you would want to get engaged but are not engaged, the question is, are we discussing that? Have I expressed that expectation? Have I expressed my need to get engaged? And so if I would look at a couple and I were to talk to one of the partners and they would say, I really want to get engaged, but my partner hasn't proposed yet, I would be wondering how much of a conversation that has been, how aware their partner is that the engagement is an important piece in their relationship so that you don't build up resentment. Now, the reason I'm not okay with someone going, if you're not engaged after 5 years, there's something wrong, is because the reason you might not get engaged yet depends on context. It depends on your situation. And there is no fixed timeline when it comes to reaching relationship milestones, whether it's getting engaged, getting married, having a kid, buying a house. All of those are relationship milestones that really depend on the couple. Every couple goes at their own pace. Some will get engaged after 2 years. Some will get engaged after 5. Some, if you look at us, got engaged after 10. And so it has more to do with context rather than going, if you've been dating for more than 5 years and you're not engaged, there's something wrong. If you're not engaged yet and that's important to you, I would clarify why that's not the case yet. What's currently going on in your relationship that's preventing that? I would also look at what your partner believes about getting engaged and what the priorities for them are as well, so that you can start to have that type of conversation. Again, it's not because you're not engaged after 5 years that it's automatically wrong. We want to look at the context and your situation and the conversations that you've been having. We cannot assume that our partner thinks the same way as us. We need to have the conversations about the things that are important to us so that we can start to align on that, so we can understand each other's point of view and situation. For example, we did years of long distance and we put our careers first for quite a long time. We wanted to prioritize our careers, and that was what we had agreed on. Now, we did have a lot of fights around when we would want to get engaged because I had expected to be engaged much sooner. So when I understood Dennis's side and he understood mine, we were able to come to an agreement. And that's called co-creation. I'm not saying the process was smooth or it was easy or it was just not frustrating. It was for many, many, many years until we sat down, we talked about it, we started to understand each other's perspective, and we decided what works for us. So if you're hearing someone suggest that something's wrong because you're not at a certain stage in your relationship yet, I know it won't always be easy to reduce that external noise, but your timeline is very personal. At the end of the day, that involves you and your partner. I think that if I've learned one thing from all of the advice that I have gotten over our 15-year relationship, it's at the end of the day, what matters is that you and your partner align on your decisions, that you're able to have the conversations together, and that you're able to reach certain agreements that work for you so that you can feel satisfied, so that you can feel fulfilled. You won't always do things the way others expect you to do things. Regardless of what you do, there will always be someone to tell you you should do things differently. I think that has been one of the biggest realizations for me. So whatever I do, there will always be someone who could do things differently, who would want to do things differently, who would suggest me to do certain things differently. And at the end of the day, I want to ask myself, what do I want? What works for us? And what is important for us? Are we having those conversations? All right, thank you so much for submitting the different pieces of advice. If you have some of your own that you're just confused about and you're not sure if you should follow, please DM me on Instagram at Toolbox for Love, or comment below what that advice was so that I can address it in one of the next videos. For now, like if you learned something new, subscribe if you want to get notified for the next part of this series, and don't forget that there's a part 1. Thank you for watching and see you in the next one.